Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to the mid-70s and we're going to be taking a look at Peter Frampton, and he's going to be playing through his track, Do You Feel Like We Do? So let's get Peter and the guys up on screen and see how they get on. I'm just going to jump in here because I want to mention first of all the footage and the sound we get is great, and considering this is from the Midnight Special TV show, the cutting and the way that it's put together is really cool because in the intro we've got that split screen of keys and guitar and it's really well done. It's like a professional video you'd get after a live event, so it's a really cool way to see everything. That's sometimes a massive issue with stuff filmed in the 70s and the 60s as well, where the cameramen were all over the place and the director was telling somebody to look in the wrong direction, but we haven't got that here. And focusing on Peter, I have done one other video of Peter, but he got requested so many times again, and especially this performance because I think of the freeform nature of the jam that happens at the end of the track. And this is one of those tracks that I think on the record was 6 or 7 minutes long, but then in the live versions it varies from anywhere from 10 minutes to 14 minutes. maybe even 17 minutes. So it's one of those tracks that has a lot of extemporization in it and has a lot of scope for that. On the other video that I did, I focused on the talk box and Peter's use of that, as well as his technique and his playing. But if you want more emphasis on that as an effect, then you can go and watch that other video. when he does perform, the vocals are always top notch, and you'll always have at least one harmony vocal going in there, and that's such a great thing to go to live. I do mention it in other videos where as soon as you start getting harmony vocals in there, just gives it such a different dimension to just that standalone voice in the band. And also here, the fact that we've got keys really filling in the sound. It's one of those things that live just makes such a difference when you've got that keys organ normally in the 70s. The fact that obviously he's playing chords and all of that rhythm work while singing, therefore doubling the difficulty. I always say this. So you get a really cool, thick, full band sound. Even though you might only have 3 or 4 members in the band, just all of those things coming together, and generally more often than not, with the old classic bands and the great bands, the harmony singers were the other instrumentalists. They weren't just backing singers standing at the side of the stage. And looking at the intro, straight away we've got interest, because we've got a really cool guitar line that is going to be harmonized on keys by Bob Mayo, by the way, who's playing keys here, because it's a really interesting start to the track, especially when you have an instant key change as well, because it means that you're always getting something new going into your ears. It's very rarely repeated too much. As soon as it's going to be repeated too much, that's where the change comes in. And Peter was one of those guys that absolutely had that appreciation, not only of melody, but also keeping things interesting the whole time. And when I mention that, in this track, pretty much from 4 minutes onwards, we're going to be having the same progression until the end of the track. And to keep that interesting for 6 or 7 minutes with the same, and it's only 3 chords by the way, takes a lot of doing and a lot of ability. And Peter's one of those guys who I think his guitar playing might have flown under the radar because of the fact that he was maybe more mainstream and seen maybe more as a popular artist in terms of pop and that genre. And it's very much following that recipe, that pop music recipe, in terms of where you have your verse and your chorus and your solo and a mid-late, if you want to throw that in there as well. So by throwing that in and really conforming and not being particularly progressive, people might have thought that it was just pop music and maybe not have looked at the guitar so much. But Peter was absolutely one of those guys that when it did get progressive, he had so many different directions he could throw his playing in. Another thing to look out for that Peter's doing throughout this whole track is how he changes up his tone. In the intro, we're pretty much all in with his main lead tone, and then we really do cut back, and we have some really clean elements in there as well, where he rolls off that distortion, and then there's a tiny bit of delay on there when he does bring in the distortion towards the beginning of the track, and then he'll totally cut that delay off, and then we'll get into a little talk box section as well. Again, that's going to now give the guitar that human voice quality, so it is now like having a human voice. It's really breaking away from lead guitar. And then at the end, we're going to be getting into just overdriven lead guitar as well, where we take the dynamics right back up to the top again for that crescendo. So it's really interesting to have a look through the whole track and analyze that guitar and see exactly what's going on with it throughout the performance, because in order to keep such a strict sequence of events such as the verse, chorus, solo, like I said, that progression, it's got to have so many different elements in there that you need to be changing up all the time, and Peter absolutely does that throughout this performance. Once you start to combine that change in tone and expression, and also changing the tone on your guitar, sometimes flicking to the bridge pickup and the neck pickup, to having those total opposites, can really make your playing so much more interesting, especially once you start affecting the dynamics on your guitar with palm muting and, you know, picking slightly harder, putting in a little bit of alternate picking. And talking about that, Peter tends to throw in quite a lot of downstrokes here. So a lot of down picks, not a great deal of alternate picks runs. Peter Frampton's playing is just controlled the whole time. You never really see him ever go off the rails and totally lose it. He knows exactly where he's going. And I've just cued it forward a little bit here, but I do suggest that you watch the video the whole way through, because we've got some great playing throughout this whole performance. This is going to be going into this talk box solo, and it's a great indication actually of the change in dynamics that Peter throws into all of his performances. But let's get back into it. have it. What a great end solo section that was. Just really harking back to that point that I made about Peter being so solid with his lead work. The way that he goes from just playing the single note solo as he normally would, and then getting into chord shapes, picking, and just having that interest level and keeping it so high all the time. When I mentioned about Peter's downstrokes and then the occasional upstrokes that he throws in there for a little bit more speed, the reason that he can keep this so interesting for 6 minutes over the same chord progression is because of his versatility, but also the variety of his playing, because he's got those hammer-ons and pull-offs, those faster runs that he can go to if he wants to. He can then slow down his playing. He's got that control of vibrato so that he can sell you slow playing as well, which is such a difficult thing to do, and people don't realize it is really difficult to play slowly well, and Peter's one of those guys that can do that. When he wants to arpeggiate chords, he can do that. We're not going to be getting into sweep picking with Peter because he is on that mainstream side in terms of, I'm sure if he wants to, he can throw that technique in there, but in terms of having melody and something that a crowd can sing back, but by no means is he ever restricted in the way that he can play. In terms of throwing in those faster sections, giving the real light and shade in the speed of performance. And most of the best solos of all time have always had that variation of speed within them. If Peter was a frontman, supplied that vocal, and then threw it over to a lead guitarist, and the lead guitarist played what Peter's playing in this, everyone would go crazy because it's such a great lead solo and there's so much going on in there. It just seems to happen sometimes that when somebody sings and plays, the playing isn't under that spotlight as much as it would be if it was just a guy playing a guitar without any vocals. But it's great to have a look at Peter in this kind of setting because this is more of an extemporization and a free-form kind of jam with the end of this track, so we can really see what Peter can do on the fretboard. And I'm sure most of the time, especially with live performances and on TV, you'd be restricted to your 3 or 4 minute recorded version of the track. And as always, a quick shout out to the full band, because it's never just one person that is the reason that something sounds great. They need that foundation of the solid bass, solid drums, and solid keys as well. It's just all being absolutely laid down in such a great way live, just so tight, in order for Peter to then lay down these lead sections over the top, and it all works so well. Such a great sound on this live show as well. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!